Hello guys, Ancient Gameplays, I'm Fabio Pisco, and today we have another GPU comparison, this time the RX 9070 XT versus the RX 7900 XTX versus the RTX 5080. And I also added the RTX 4070 Super and the RX 9070 non-XT. That will not be the focus of this video, but I mean, having those results won't hurt anyone, so why not? Now, before you start saying, of course the RTX 5080 is faster than the 9070 XT, well, it is meant to, it is supposed to. Now, the point of this video is to show you if it is really worth the extra money on the 5080 over the 9070 XT. And for that, we're gonna test productivity, gaming, some VR benchmarks, frame generation, etc, etc, etc. As usual. So let's start with the pricing. The prices are kind of messed up around the world, sadly, and in the US we have the RX 9070 XT costing around $1,050, even though the MSRP is $599, which is crazy, and the RX 7900 XTX still costing around $1,100, even though it was released 2 years ago and the MSRP was $999. And going to the RTX 5080, well, we have it at $1,449, which is $400 over the 9070 XT, and that's a lot of money that can get a new CPU, for example. So it is $449 above MSRP and $400 above the 9070 XT. As for the European prices, looking at Mind Factory Germany, we have the RX 9070 XT at 779 euros, which is honestly not that bad since we already have taxes included. Then we have the RX 7900 XTX at 918 euros, which is still a high price considering the price tag is again 999, and the RTX 5080 at 1279 euros. And it is actually astonishing to see for the first time in years the European prices being better than the American ones. So now we actually, considering taxes and so on, for example, in Germany I believe it is like 20% taxes, so considering that we already have the taxes on that 9070 XT and on the RTX 5080, the prices are kind of okayish, while in America, since taxes are mostly not included, the prices are quite messed up. So it is really interesting to see European prices actually being better than the American ones. And now that you know what you need to know, let's dive into the benchmarks. But before, let's dive into the sponsor. Today's video sponsor is GVG Mall, bringing you lots of software deals like Windows 10, Windows 11, Office 2019 or 2021 with a new Windows 11 design, and for all of these you can use my SKG discount code for 30% off, getting a Windows 11 serial key for $22 and a Windows 10 one for only $15. Then use the key on your Windows settings and you'll have an activated system. Starting with Cinebench R24, we only have numbers for the older GPUs as Cinebench R24 still doesn't have any update for the RX 9000 and the RTX 5000 series, but as expected, even the 4070 Super is able to outmatch the 7900 XTX, and by a fair amount. Although, as we go into budget benchmark, we have a different result, where all GPUs beside the RTX 5080 deliver around the same results, almost within the margin of error, I would say, while the 5080 is up to 12% faster than the 9070 XT. As we go into image generation using Stable Diffusion 1.5, we can see that even the RX 9070 is faster than the 7900 XTX by 20%, with the 9070 XT reaching a 29% difference, which is kind of a lot, but it is still barely faster than the RTX 4070 Super here when using ONNX. And as soon as we use TensorRT, the RTX 4070 Super beats every single AMD card here, with the 5080 being up to 92% faster than the 9070 XT, so almost twice as fast. And this means that while the 9070 XT takes around 2.3 seconds to generate an image, the RTX 5080 does it in 1.2 seconds, which is not a meaningful difference to most people, I would say, but a huge difference percentage-wise. And moving to VR benchmarks, we start with the orange room, which is kind of a more CPU plus GPU benchmark, where we see the Nvidia cards slightly ahead, but nothing really relevant. On the blue room though, we can see the absolute raw power of each card, with the RX 7900 XTX virtually matching the RTX 5080, and with both RX 9070 cards being now faster than the RTX 4070 Super, as they should be all the time, I believe. Although when we're messing with Blender, things get even more red for the AMD side, pun intended, where the Nvidia cards simply obliterate any AMD offer at the same price, with the RTX 5080 being almost 3 times faster than the RX 9070 XT, that is now also slower than the RX 7900 XTX by a fair amount. AMD did say that they are working on bringing ROCm officially for Windows and making CUDA work with the AMD cards as well, and if that happens, we could be seeing some major changes. But till then, AMD cards just really have no chance here. But well, the RX 9000 series GPUs were specifically built with gaming in mind, and even in games like Assetto Corsa, where the Nvidia GPUs tend to strive, the AMD GPUs do fairly well at 1080p. At 1440p the GPU load starts increasing though, and the 5080 just kind of flies away, being 33% faster than the 9070 XT, that again is considerably slower than the 7900 XTX. And at 4K, somehow the 9070 XT gets closer to the 7900 XTX. And I do have to mention that in early drivers, the RX 9070 cards performed considerably worse in this game, and the second drivers did increase the performance by quite a bit. So I believe that we can expect more performance enhancements for the next 6 months or so, which is great if you ask me. And as we're talking about lack of optimization for some titles, I believe Counter-Strike 2 is one of them, where the 9070 and 9070 XT just don't run the way they're supposed to. At 1080p things are kind of okayish, but as we move to 1440p we have a huge performance drop when compared to the 7900 XTX that is almost on par with the RTX 5080. And at 4K things get even worse for the new cards that are performing much worse than the big boy 7900 XTX. Also, the 5080 is 52% faster here, delivering over 300 FPS, while the 9070 XT struggles to go over 200. Now we finally have some games where the new cards perform very well, starting with Call of Duty Black Ops 6, where the 9070 XT matches the 5080 at 1080p. To my surprise, as we move to 1440p, things change, but not the way I thought they would, with the 9070 XT being the second fastest card, and outmatching the 5080 by 3%. And the skills do get maintained at 4K. The AMD cards just perform extremely well in this title. And now we're running Cyberpunk 2077 that, even though it is an Nvidia tech demo, say whatever you want, works pretty well on the AMD cards. But after all, I mean, this is 1080p, and we're kind of CPU bottlenecked even with the 9800X3D. As we move to 1440p, the AMD cards still show a very powerful performance, with the 9070 XT being on par with the 7900 XTX, and with the 5080 being only 10% faster than them, which is not that much. At 4K the 5080 gets a bit more ground, being 11% faster than the 7900 XTX, which is to be expected, and 16% faster than the 9070 XT. We should also mention that the RTX 4070 Super gets completely smashed at 4K, not even reaching 40 FPS, while even the 9070 non-XT delivers around 60. Hogwarts Legacy is another one of those games that simply loves raw power, and at 1080p we see some good results for the AMD cards for sure. At 1440p, the 7900 XTX is still the fastest card, as it features way more bandwidth than the 9070 XT, that even at 1440p delivers 96% of the 5080's performance, with higher 1% lows, which is great. And it is only at 4K that the 5080 finally shows its power, now matching the 7900 XTX. And keep in mind that it isn't this type of games that the 5080 shines, and if you want a perspective, the 4080 Super was delivering only 70 average FPS here, losing to the 9070 XT. Microsoft Flight Simulator, though, is one of those titles that really likes Nvidia's newer architectures like Ada Lovelace and Blackwell, as you can see here at 1080p. But you can see it even more at 1440p, where the 5080 is 26% faster than the 7900 XTX, which is quite good, and 37% faster than the 9070 XT. And again, it is not that the AMD cards perform bad, it is just that the Nvidia ones perform better here. As we move to 4K, well, the 4070 Super is almost on par with the 9070 non-XT, and the 5080 is the only card staying comfortably at almost 90 FPS, being 39% faster than the 9070 XT. As for Alan Wake 2, it is another Nvidia stack demo, but it works quite well on AMD cards when it comes to rasterization, as can be seen here at 1080p. Where the 5080 is outmatched by both the 7900 XTX and 9070 XT. Moving to 1440p makes the 5080 on par with these three AMD cards, the 7900 XTX, the 9070 XT, and strangely, even the 9070 non-XT that had a huge performance uplift when overclocking at this resolution, and that's something that did not happen at 4K. Where the 5080 is now the fastest card by 1 FPS, and the 9070 is 28% faster than the 4080 Super, in this case the 4070 Super, sorry. As for Black Myth Wukong, it is a very good looking game, but it lacks a lot in terms of optimization. I mean, at 1080p the 5080 is only 24% faster than the 4070 Super, and you might say that this is some kind of CPU bottleneck, but even at 1440p it is only 30% faster. And the 9070 XT is actually able to match the 7900 XTX, delivering 90% of the 5080's performance. And it is kind of only at 4K that the difference gets more noticeable or more pronounced, but still, it just kind of feels wrong to upgrade from a 4070 Super to a 5080 just to go from 54 to 76 FPS. Avatar Frontiers of Pandora is one of those titles that has ray tracing constantly enabled, and that's the reason why we have the 5080 being 24% faster than the 9070 XT, which is honestly not that much. But we do have the 4070 Super matching the 9070 non-XT, something that does not change at 1440p. In fact, the only things that change are the 5080, that is now 26% faster than the 9070 XT, and the 7900 XTX that now outmatches the 9070 XT by a little, and that little turns into 8% as we move to 4K, meaning that even with much better ray tracing capabilities, the 32 extra computer units on the XTX do make the difference. Moving to Starfield, at 1080p we have all cards performing quite well, considering everything. But for these cards what really matters is 1440p, where the 5080 is still barely faster than the AMD cards, being only 8% faster than the 7900 XTX and 11% faster than the 9070 XT, with the 9070 non-XT now being 15% faster than the 4070 Super. And I was expecting the 5080 to kind of take off at 4K, but that wasn't the case. In fact, it is only a bit faster than the 7900 XTX and 12% faster than the 9070 XT. It is the fastest card for sure, but still the most expensive one by a lot. S.T.A.L.K.E.R 2 is one of those titles that, at least from my benchmarking, runs with higher averages on the Nvidia cards, but higher 1% lows on the AMD ones, especially when we're talking about the RTX 5000 series. As you see, moving to 1440p shows even more of it, where the 4070 Super now matches the 9070 non-XT, but delivers way lower 1% lows, meaning that it delivers a less smooth experience. And the 5080 delivers 25% more FPS than the 9070 XT, but much lower 1% lows as well. At 4K the trend continues, but now the 5080 is the only card able to deliver over 60 FPS natively, being 39% faster than the 9070 XT and 22% faster than the 7900 XTX. That of course is also faster than the 9070 XT in this title. And Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 is one of those games where I don't really know if it has to do with driver optimizations or the game developers, but the Nvidia cards just blow the AMD ones out of the water. Here, even at 1080p, the 5080 is 40% faster than the 9070 XT, that by itself is faster than the 7900 XTX. Even the 4070 Super is faster than the 9070 non-XT here, showing us that something isn't normal. At 1440p, the 9070 non-XT outmatches the 4070 Super by a little, with the 5080 still being 39% faster than the 9070 XT. And at 4K, the experience is just entirely different, with the 5080 delivering over 70 FPS, while none of the other cards are even able to deliver anything remotely close to 60. A massive win for the 5080 here. As for God of War Ragnarok, we have the 5080 being the fastest card even at 1080p, and the 9070 XT outmatching the 7900 XTX. In fact, even the 9070 non-XT is close enough to the 7900 XTX at 1080p. And the same for 1440p, with the 5080 being 16% faster than the 9070 XT, which is still too little of a difference, and the 9070 non-XT outperforming the 4070 Super by 18%. Difference that just grows to 21% at 4K, where the 7900 XTX is finally able to match the 9070 XT, and we have once again the 5080 delivering 20% more FPS than the 9070 XT, but also lower 1% lows. Silent Hill 2 is one of those games that has a shitty implementation with lots of traversal stutters and yeah, developers just didn't do their job correctly. But what I noticed is that the AMD 9000 series run considerably smoother in this game compared to every other card that I tested so far. Take this example at 1440p, where you have the 5080 delivering 26% more FPS than the 9070 XT, which is to be expected, but at the same time delivers lower 1% lows, meaning that we have a 2.15 times difference in between the averages and the 1% lows, showing how stuttery the gameplay is. And the difference is only reduced at 4K, where the 5080 is also the only card now being able to achieve over 70 FPS, while the other cards can't even reach 60. I guess it's a trade-off. And now we have Space Marine 2 that from all the testing that I did, I can say that this is one of those games that really loves bandwidth and raw power, especially when using 4K textures. It seems that the new cards still need more optimization, and even the 9070 non-XT is being outmatched by the 4070 Super at 1080p. At 1440p, the 9070 non-XT does get some ground though, with the 7900 XTX still being 12% faster than the 9070 XT, and with the 5080 being considerably faster as well. Results that do translate to 4K, with the 5080 being 17% faster than the 7900 XTX and 28% faster than the 9070. And by the way, the lower 1% lows or the low 1% lows you see here with the 5080 and the 9070 XT at stock are due to the lack of bandwidth and VRAM, as these cards only have 16GB VRAM, and pushing those high FPS numbers while refreshing VRAM is kind of a no-go. Hence why the lower tier cards have no dips there, because the FPS are quite lower as well, needing less bandwidth. And the last game tested is Hellblade 2, another Unreal Engine 5 title. I noticed by the way that the 5080 had some exaggerated shimmering when using TSR and some glitched shadows when using the LSS, but maybe that will get fixed soon. Still, at 1080p the 9070 XT is the fastest card here, and it is only slightly outmatched by the 5080 at 1440p, while still delivering higher 1% lows, and even when going to 4K, the 5080 is only able to slightly outmatch the other cards. being now 12% faster than the 9070 XT, difference that again should be much bigger. And we're finally at the averages. Starting at 1080p, we can see the stock 5080 performance as the base one, and you can also see that the 7900 XTX can deliver up to 96% of the 5080 stock performance, and the 9070 XT up to 93%, which is great considering how cheaper or how much cheaper they are generally. But the reality is that almost no one will use these cards for 1080p, and as we go to 1440p, the 7900 XTX is still delivering up to 95% of the 5080 stock performance. But the 9070 XT now goes below the 90% mark, delivering 88% of the 5080 stock performance, which again is not that bad considering the price difference. But the 5080 just keeps raising the difference every time we raise resolution, and at 4K, the 9070 XT delivers up to 85% the performance of the stock 5080. But again, if we consider that the 9070 XT cost is around 70%, things don't really look that bad. But considering again the MSRP prices, the difference should be around 60%. Not bad, but not good either. So the RTX 5080 is up to 27% faster, but also up to 40% more expensive depending on the country of course. And with all this in mind, price, performance and so on, the rasterization of course, what about ray tracing performance? Because that's where the AMD cards are usually way slower, right? When it comes to ray tracing, things are different though. In Cyberpunk 2077, even at 1080p we're getting some interesting numbers, and that's because we're quite CPU bottlenecked. As we move to 1440p, we can see that the 9070 non-XT is around the 4070 Super in terms of ray tracing performance in this particular scene, and the 9070 XT is now 24% faster than the 7900 XTX when using ray tracing and FSR, with of course the 5080 being the fastest card overall. Something that gets more pronounced at 4K, where the 5080 is 32% faster than the 9070 XT, which is honestly not that much considering the price difference and considering that Nvidia is actually 2 or 3 generations above in terms of ray tracing. Well, I guess it was, not anymore, which is something interesting to see. And now we have a game that uses ray tracing lightly, Resident Evil 4. Firstly, the 7900 XTX performs exceptionally well in this title, and secondly, even though the 7900 XTX is 9% faster than the 9070 XT in rasterization, it is only 2% faster with ray tracing enabled, showing us how much the 9000 series cards evolved in terms of ray tracing. As we move to 1440p, the 7900 XTX performs even better, now matching the 5080's raster performance, and the 4070 Super just gets obliterated by the 9070 non-XT with and without ray tracing. Something that doesn't really change at 1440p ultra-wide, where it is 29% faster even with ray tracing enabled. Overall, great results for all cards here. The Witcher 3 is another example of a ray tracing CPU bottleneck, where the 3 fastest cards are delivering around the same results at 1080p. At 1440p though, we can immediately see the 5080 pulling its own weight, being faster in rasterization and ray tracing, but still the little differences kind of seem odd to me, with even the 7900 XTX outmatching the 9070 XT, which is odd in ray tracing. But the same thing happens at 4K. So it seems that the 7900 XTX just works pretty well with ray tracing in this title, unless you're really pushing for very high ray tracing settings, with the 5080 being 16% faster than the 9070 XT, which is again not that great, and the 9070 non-XT being 27% faster than the 4070 Super. Alan Wake 2 is an entirely different scenario though, and this happens because the game has ray reconstruction, and that delivers a huge advantage in terms of performance for the Nvidia cards of course, compared to the normal in-game denoiser. And that is why you see even the 4070 Super being on par with the 9070 XT, and of course the 5080 being 54% faster. At 1440p, since we're using path tracing, all cards deliver kind of a slideshow besides the 5080 that delivers over 60 FPS in one of the heaviest scenes, being now 64% faster than the 9070 XT. As we move to 4K, not even the 5080 is able to deliver a decent experience, but the remaining cards are delivering literal slideshows, so I would pick 37 FPS over those for sure. And now that he saw the ray tracing performance as well, I believe that he thought the difference would be much bigger. I guess, right? Well, it happens that unless you're running super high ray tracing or path tracing configurations, or you're running super unoptimized games, or of course you're running games that use heavy implementations of path tracing or RTX GI or RTGI, I believe, well, you're quite good with the AMD cards, especially with the R24 ones that improved ray tracing performance considerably. But of course, if you're running games like Black Myth Wukong or Indiana Jones that rely on NVIDIA implementation of ray tracing to kind of do their ray tracing at all, yeah, then your AMD card will have a bad time. Because again, they're relying heavily on NVIDIA technology to make their ray tracing work, so of course that the NVIDIA cards will perform way better. But well, we have productivity, gaming benchmarks rasterization-wise, ray tracing performance, and now let's take a look at frame generation, because there are definitely some surprises here. Starting with Space Marine 2, we already see some interesting stuff, with the 7900 XTX having a 79% smoothness increase with frame generation, while the 5080 has a 69% increase. No pun intended. And if you look at the 9070 XT, we have an even bigger increase of 92%. And of course the 4070 Super has a mild increase of 48%, maybe lacking bandwidth due to the 4K textures. And I believe that was exactly the case, as when going to 1440p, the difference increases to 49%, but the 1% lows are worse than without frame generation. On the other hand, smoothness increase on the 9070 XT drops to 80%, and with lower 1% lows due to the lack of bandwidth as well. And at 4K, all AMD cards seem to get from 73 to 79% increase in smoothness, while the 5080 only has a 62% increase. And the 4070 Super has a 52% one, and again with lower 1% lows. But it seems that things work well in S.T.A.L.K.E.R 2 though, where at 1080p all AMD cards are delivering a 96% increased smoothness with frame generation, while the 5080 delivers a 69% increase, no pun intended again, and the 4070 Super a 57% one. But since almost nobody focuses on 1080p, let's move to 1440p, where the smoothness increase of the AMD cards is still much higher, where for example the 5080 is normally 15% faster than the 7900 XTX, but when enabling frame generation, the 7900 XTX gets to deliver 3% more smoothness, especially if we count the 1% lows. And it is only at 4K that things don't change much, to be honest, with the AMD cards still delivering more smoothness percentage-wise. And the last benchmark is with Call of Duty Black Ops 6, and unless a huge number of things changed in the last couple of days, frame generation is super bugged on the RX 9070 series, but don't worry, as I already contacted AMD about this. It seems to be working well on the 7900 XTX and Nvidia cards though, which makes it seem like a driver issue. Going to 1440p somehow makes it work slightly better on the 9000 series, so instead of being a disaster, it is only a piece of crap, and at 4K, well, we have it working decently well, I would say, at least on par with what we get from the 9070, from the 7900 XTX as well. I'm even getting confused because of all these dumb results, with both Nvidia cards doing their job in this game perfectly, and the AMD ones, well, the newer ones at least, getting quite bugged. Let's now move to the final thoughts. And well guys, you saw it all. You saw the RTX 4070 Super, the RX 9070 non-XT, the RX 9070 XT, 7900 XTX, and the RTX 5080. You saw power draw, you saw gaming benchmarks, you saw ray tracing benchmarks, you saw frame generation benchmarks, so you have lots and lots of data so you can conclude what you need or what you don't need. In my humble opinion, if you're going to Europe, both cards have a really good price performance, or I wouldn't say really good price performance, I should say instead that they have a really close price performance ratio. For example, in Europe we have the RX 9070 XT at roughly, let's say, 700 euros, 800 euros, which is a decent price considering taxes, and we have the RTX 5080 at around, let's say, 1300 euros, which again, considering prices, considering the taxes and so on, it is not that bad. It is still not where it should be, but not that bad, considering the American prices that are way worse right now. But again, if price is not an issue, the 5080 is the best card that you can get. It consumes a low amount of power, especially if you don't overclock it to the moon. The power draw is not that much, well, if the software readings are correct, of course. It is also a very cool card. It performs considerably well in some titles compared to the 9070 XT, as it should, considering the price as well. It has the LSS4 in more titles with a transformer model, frame generation works in almost every single game, and of course it is much better in productivity, especially if you're playing around with Blender. Especially in that scenario, it is much faster. While the advantage of the RX 9070 XT is usually the price or the price-performance ratio, because you can get one of those cards and as you can see it performs really well, really close to the 7900 XTX. It only has 16GB instead of 24 or 32 gigabytes VRAM, which in some games is not optimal, the same for the 5080. For example, when running Warhammer Space Marine 2 with the 4K textures, 16GB VRAM is just not enough. And with the 24GB VRAM, the 7900 XTX just delivers a much smoother experience. But in 90+% of games, you're completely fine with 16GB even at 4K, so that's a thing. But yeah, generally we have FSR4. If the game doesn't really have FSR4, you can just use FSR4 mods that are really easy to implement, and the image quality is miles better than FSR 3.1.3. You have a cheap card that doesn't really consume that much power also, and you can undervolt it to consume below 300 watts, 250, 260, and still performing decently well. But just to end, should you get it? Well, as always, that's up to you. That's up to the money that you want to spend, that's up to the parts that you want to spend, but generally I believe that for most people the 9070 XT will be more than enough, especially to play at 1440p, 1440p ultra-wide, especially now that you have FSR4 as well. And if you want to go a league above, then you get the RTX 5080, but again, most people won't really need it unless they're working a lot in productivity, or again, they really have the money to spend and they want that specific card. And well guys, that's all for today's video. Thank you very much for watching. Don't forget, hit like, subscribe and share this video because that really helps a lot. And I guess that I see you in the next one. And by the way, I'm sitting right here because I kind of busted my knee. Usually I tend to make these videos, the GPU comparison videos, kind of standing, but this time I'm seated down because I busted the knee, the right knee. I took an arrow to the knee. Actually, I didn't, but yeah, you know what I mean. Thank you very much for watching and see you in the next video, guys. Testing AFMF 2.1 with dual GPU as well. I'll be testing Radeon image sharpening and I'll be testing more and more things. So stay tuned. Cheers.